Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Because we only have an hour today, we'll go ahead and get started with the introductory remarks. So thank you all so much for joining us. Almost a year ago today, so a bit of background, we came together as kind of a data use community in Washington, D.C. to celebrate the 2019 Data Rev hosted by the MCC PEPFAR Data Collaboratives for Local Impact Program. At this event, we launched 6 proposed principles for subnational data use. Those were listen, document, and share, measure at community scale, build local skills, bridge levels, be intentionally inclusive, and fund local organizations. These represented summarized good practices that emerged from crowdsourced case studies and discussions around how to engage with local communities through data within the context of the 2030 Agenda. We had anticipated coming together again this month in Bern, using the occasion of the UN World Data Forum to reflect on whether these principles still held true and to take stock of what was missing. But of course, everyone's plans for 2020 underwent a very dramatic shift. Our new normal has prompted me, and I'd imagine others here, to reflect on prior assumptions of what business as usual can and should look like. Today, I hope we can come together still and reflect, as well as possible in this digital format, about how our ways of thinking around data use, collaboration, and impact have changed over the past several months. We encourage everyone to participate today via the Zoom question and answer function, as well as and especially through social media using the hashtags WhenTheDataStop and UN Data Forum. Today's conversations will feed into this year's update of the Subnational Principles, and we look forward to continuing to engage in the future as we all try to move on from crisis response to resilient recovery. So to give you a sense of the run of show, over the next hour, we'll have 2 mini roundtable discussions. The first prompting reflection on the past year, the second really prompting a look forward. And between those, we'll get to hear 2-minute lightning talks from 5 subnational data use innovators responding to the global crisis. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Casey Dunning, the Director of Results and Learning at the U.S. Millennium Challenge Corporation, who will be moderating our first roundtable.
While the rest of the panelists join, let me go ahead and introduce them. I'm thrilled to be moderating the first of the mini roundtables today. And as Paige noted, we're going to hear a look back and reflections from our esteemed panelists. With us this morning, we have Marie-Claude Zando, the Chief of Party for DCDJ, a DCLI-funded activity implemented by Development Gateways in Cote d'Ivoire. And I think she is still joining us. We also have Filip Davidovich, who is the technical specialist with IREX, who is also a current counterpart with the MCC-funded Data Zetu in Tanzania. And I see Philip, welcome. And then finally, we have Victor Ohurogu, who is the Senior Program Manager with GPSDD, the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data. So I'd like to pose the same question to our panelists for the first round, and I'm hoping to squeeze in 2 rounds of questions here. So to all the panelists, I would love you to reflect on do the subnational principles still matter? How are you thinking about how the global crisis has changed the way that we work and think about data? And so to start, since I see Victor front and center, let's start with you, Victor, on your reflections of do the principles still matter?
All right, thank you so much, Casey. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
All right, thank you. Yes, very quickly, the principles still strongly matter for us at the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data. And we're quite intentional about those principles and to ensure that they are strongly reflected in the work we do across the region. And currently, we've got a partnership initiative with the UN Economic Commission for Africa on COVID-19, which aims to support member states of the African region in their response to COVID-19. And we're currently focused on also on post-COVID-19 recovery and resilience. And examples of how these principles are reflected in what we do, I can quickly run through a few examples. One was when the pandemic broke out, we undertook a huge rapid data and capacity needs assessment across several communities in over 35 countries in Africa, just to listen, learn, document, and share their needs and priority issues with the UN system in each of these countries, with the Deputy Secretary General, with the heads of the National Statistical Offices, and also with a whole team of our partners who were at that point willing to help support, African countries in their response to COVID-19. And we did, of course, surface about 4 major data, needs areas. One was around population, understanding who was most hit, who is, more vulnerable, understanding the, where the health infrastructures are. Thirdly, about virus tracking. And the 4th thing was about understanding the socioeconomic impact of COVID-19. And then the second example was about how we worked with several statistical offices. We wrote to about 54 countries, of course, in Africa, 54 countries, and had conversations with over 35 of them, deep dive conversations with over 35 countries in Africa, with the heads of national statistical offices, line ministries, and ensuring that they could, pull data from both national and subnational levels, to drive, the various interventions that the government was implementing at that point in time, and also, in deciding what policy issues that they needed to focus on. And so data at both national and subnational levels were being merged. And we did influence several of those NSOs, the National Statistical Offices, and the task forces on COVID-19 in a number of these countries to expand membership, to have people from the subnational, from CSOs, from private sector get involved, in the work that was happening at the country level. And finally, just because of time, we did ensure that all our technical partners, example, GRI3, ESRI, Qatar Computing Research Institute, we built in so many of them to support all these countries in Africa. We were deliberate in having them transfer capacity to the local institutions, because we do believe that one way of achieving sustainable development is ensuring that the local institutions are well capacitated. So we have a huge capacity development program that has come out of this whole intervention. I guess it's going to be one of the most ambitious capacity development program you'll be seeing in the African continent, targeting over 35 NSOs in 35 countries to deal with issues of both hard and soft skills around data and statistical development. And so in terms of how the whole crisis has changed the way we work, of course, we all pivoted, our current operations to focus on COVID-19. Nobody was traveling any longer, and this whole, crisis, for me, evidenced the need for African governments, to invest heavily more in digital infrastructure. We had over 250 consultations with various communities, and we also have ongoing trainings, and all of these are taking place virtually. And we found it quite challenging for a lot of our government institutions, the issue of digital divide. A number of them, they struggle with, tools like the Zoom, the moral tools that we're using to deliver trainings and things like that, but that's the new normal. And finally, I think that this whole thing also is driving for a more collaborative approach, to working on data across several actors in each of these countries. And there seems to be a greater concerted effort to now democratize data, making it more open, making it more accessible for decision makers at all levels of governance. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Victor. Let's go to Marie-Claude. Same question. We'd love to hear your reflections on do the principles still matter? And you're on mute right now. Perfect.
Like Victor, I would say that the principles still matter, especially in Africa, because of the disparity of the resources that the subnational level used to get even before the crisis. And now it's even more important that we train people, we give capacity, we do capacity building. It's very important that we connect the community to understand how the crisis has changed their life and how we can help them to be prepared for this new era of the way we work, So in the framework of our project, we have a project with 23 health centers in Abidjan, but considered as subnational because they're not directly the central level. And so we had put in place a strong M&E system to measure. So in my opinion, two particular principles still matter. And these two principles are importance of measurement at the community scale level. So we had to think of different ways to continue to measure this impact at the community level. So being more flexible with communicating with people, adapting the way we do our M&E so that if we can get to the site, maybe we can talk to them on the phone, we can talk to them through Zoom, and this is very different for them. So we had to, and that connects to the other principle that talks about building capacity, because if people don't know how to use Zoom or don't know how to work remotely, it's really hard to connect with them. So we had to train not only the fellows that we have, those fellows are our resources. So we had to train them on new ways of working in that area of COVID, and also train the staff at the site level on new techniques of working. So we work with NGOs, we also train not only the NGOs on the importance of data, but also data privacy in this area. But we train the staff on the importance of data, the importance of using data for decision making. So all this training that we brought, we think that this is going to help those staff at the site level to be more resilient and be more prepared for the after COVID or even the COVID right now. So I think those two principles, measuring and capacity buildings, are still very important in this context of African COVID.
Thank you, Marie-Claude. And we're hearing a lot of kind of commonalities in these reflections. I would invite all of the attendees to the event to, if you have a question for our panelists, please put it in the chat box and I will keep an eye on for the next round. But before we do that, let's turn to Philip for his reflections on, do the principles still matter? You are perfect.
Hi, Casey. Yeah,
Hi.
certainly, definitely still matter. And I think as far as an IRIX's lens, the three that really stand out are the capacity building, the hyper-local focus, and the intentionally inclusive approach. Those are something that's been resonating in a lot of the ways IRIX has been trying to implement its program as related to data initiatives. But then reflecting on the impact that COVID's had in the last several months, I think what stands out to me, and echoing what Victor and Marie said, this culture of open data and transparency has really like ramped up to 11, and it's an exciting space to be in where people have a need and a desire for more transparent and open information in a time of uncertainty and crisis. But that alone, and again, like reiterating the value of capacity building, the transparency and the open data culture alone doesn't really do much, because what you'll see is just a lack of, or overwhelming volume of data being shared with not a real tangible way of using it. And that's where the capacity building that these subnational principles really have a lot of added value, and the biggest step forward with how a lot of programs can complement what's already being done, both in programs currently being implemented and in future ones down the line. But yeah, the capacity building and then the local focus on how we can contextualize this huge volume of data to each person and institution's environment is so key and valuable to how it can inform decisions. And I think that's the big takeaway, that using data has adjusted a lot of ways we've approached this space.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And I would, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat box for our panelists. But in the meantime, I will take the moderator's prerogative to ask my own. So I really appreciated the way that you each kind of touched on the capacity building principle, but in different ways, whether it's for use or new tools and approaches to communications. But then Marie, Claude, you also hit on the resource piece of it and making sure that you have that to right size all these new ways. So I wondered if you could speak to kind of the current environment and how you're making sure you have what you need to effectively do the capacity building and the measurement, which is so critically important. And then also one additional question, it seems like a lot of these new measurement techniques with regard to M&E are things that while provoked by the COVID crisis, perhaps might have some staying power. So are there any kind of improvements, as it were, that you see that might exist beyond the current crisis? You can take either of those
I
questions.
think it comes. I think it comes with different situation. I mean, I don't know what the situation is in other countries, but in my particular project, even measuring the impact has been different. Like we used to send surveys online. Now we can all go to the site and collect data or collect answer, but we couldn't do that. So we had to do it on the phone. We had to be very innovative in a way to keep in touch and collect those data or if we needed to take pictures during a training, we couldn't do it face to face. Now we had to take a screenshot of this, like the webinar that we're having, to be able to communicate around the resource or the training that we're dispensing. So I think COVID has pushed us to be very adaptive and innovative in the way that we do things. So, it really depends on the project that you're implementing. But in terms of I think you asked a question around the resources that we provided. And so our fellows, our resources have developed a lot of tools for the people that we work on, for them to better manage data and for them to better use data even after the project ended. And we didn't stop developing those tools because of COVID, but we rather connect with them remotely or work remotely. And then now that we're starting to going back on the site, we will be developing and implementing these IT solutions that we develop for them. So there's dashboards, like different tools to manage their data, and we are in the phase of implementing it on the site now. So it's not it's a little different than what we used to do. So we had to do it on like a little number of sites to see how it works, and then extend it to the rest of the sites. Just adapt to that current situation with the constraints that we have.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And Victor, turning to you, so Marie Claude just kind of described the extensive work she's leading in Abidjan, and as you noted, you were working with 35 countries and NSOs. I wonder if from that level you could provide some reflections on the kind of commonalities you heard around subnational data use and any kind of common themes that stuck out.
Yeah, one particular instance was when National Statistical Office, could not, at that point in time, generate the type of statistics that they used to produce on a monthly basis. It was a huge challenge. Data was supposed to come from different, places from across the country, superstores, district offices, and what have you. And one major issue that they spoke to us about was how do we bridge this gap? One area of work and a specific use case I could actually mention here is the use of, actually they wanted to produce CPI, consumer price, in the system that's released by most statistical offices, I think on a monthly basis. and COVID, was preventing them from going out across the places. And then we started talking to them about scanner data, and of course there was no capacity for most African NSOs. So we started talking to our partners from the north, the likes of Statistics Canada, Statistics Finland, and Eurostatistics, European Union Statistics Commission, and the UN Global Platform to see what sort of assistance they could offer to a few of these countries in Africa. And a number of countries quickly jumped on board because it was a huge gap. They needed to produce these statistics on a monthly basis. And so we're providing this, but one thing that we were very careful about was to ensure that the need was actually there from the local community, which is the statistical offices in this place. Secondly, how do we ensure that the technology, would be fit for purpose? So the whole issue of digital rights, and of course, a lot of offices are talking about digital transformation now. And so the whole, conversation around digital financing also by governments, came to the fore. And we were allowing the government to lead these conversations and not having to dump these conversations on them. They found it quite empowering that those conversations were being led by them. Of course, they were not really empowered at the start, but when we exposed a number of things to them, it helped them to pick up very quickly. We wanted to also ensure that they were in the driver's seat, negotiating, all of these issues on their own while we're giving them guidance, hand-holding them, but ensuring that they have ownership, they got leadership. And, they were very happy. And I think that a number of the UN resident coordinators were so excited about the process that they also jumped in. For instance, the UN resident coordinator office in Namibia decided that they were going to fund the statistical office in Namibia to undertake a longitudinal cohort survey on socioeconomic impact, of COVID-19, because they saw what was done in Ghana and they felt that that was important for them also to replicate. So we're enabling peer exchanges, and all these learnings across the place. And I've got so many examples, but
No.
I want to be mindful of time. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you so much, Victor. And Philip, lastly to you, we have a question from the audience. So I will toss that to you. Michael Klein asked, there's been so much noise during COVID-19, everything from the onslaught of contact tracing applications to new digital approaches being undertaken, most of which hasn't driven impact. How do the subnational data use principles help us address this challenge of impact?
Yeah, thank you. Great question. I think the big thing that highlights it is it reinforces the ownership of data in a local context. And I think that's something that's been highlighted in the DataZ2 project that IRIX has been working with MCC on in Tanzania, particularly with the partnerships with local institutions. And the emphasis on ownership of one's data really drives a lot of those key subnational principles. So having the discussions where whatever capacity building initiative that you're doing, whether it's a research initiative, a kind of listening campaign for a needs assessment or anything, having an attitude and approach that is inclusive of bringing in community members for that feedback loop is so critical to actually maintaining a lot of user cases that have long-term impacts. And something that we really saw pay huge dividends when in each of the components that we do in the DataZ2 project, which would be even things that are naturally kind of like just a research initiative or report that's just pushed up the line to maybe the donor or institutional leaders and stuff. Instead of going that approach, having dialogue about what was found in those initiatives and those findings and stuff with local partners and local community members had a lot of impact in having real tangible user cases and taking that time just to go one step further than the immediate deliverable pays huge dividends down the line. I think that's a common thing that we've used in several different programs, but in DataZ2, it's really been the core of it, and the application of the other subnational principles around that thesis has really made a lot of positive impact in that regard. So I would definitely say that engagement, intentionally being inclusive, and frankly a culture of learning while you're doing these processes is so key to the development initiative. Because I mean, I think it's challenging to go into thinking that this one deliverable will have impact on itself. So continuously having an attitude of learning and adapting and improving as the next step after something is concluded is really a great approach that we found really long-term impact with. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you, Philip and Victor and Marie. Claude, our esteemed panelist, we heard about the adaptive and flexible nature of what you're doing, and I think we heard a resounding yes that the principles still matter. They mattered before the COVID crisis, but they matter even more so right now. And so with that, I'll turn it back to Paige. Thank you again, panelists.
Awesome. Thank you so much, panelists, and thank you so much, Casey, for moderating that first session. So next up, we're going to have our lightning talk speakers. You'll have 2 minutes, and I'll signify that your 2 minutes are at time by just flipping on my camera. So I'll invite folks in order to kind of turn on your Zoom camera, and then we'll kind of start the clock on you, and then maybe just turn off when you're done. So we're inviting Renu Khanna from the Society for Health Alternatives, or SAHAJ, first. She'll be followed by John Davies from the UK Government Digital Service, Selena Lee from Zindi, Mike Klein from IMC Worldwide, and Omar Bakari from the Tanzania Data Lab. So you all have 2 minutes each. Welcome, guys, and thank you so much.
So thank you very much. I'm going to be speaking to the third principle, which is building local skills, and also principle 5, being intentionally inclusive. These are the principles that we find extremely important in our work here in India. SAHAJ, as a national partner of Equal Measures 2030, is working in 3 states of India on localizing SDGs within a social accountability framework. And what we do is we work with local community-based organizations, non-government organizations, to monitor select targets of SDG 3 and SDG 5, namely maternal health, reproductive health, sexual and reproductive rights, violence against women, harmful traditional practices. And the idea is to enable community groups to be able to understand what the state government is saying and claiming, and to be able to put forward their own micro experiences and field level realities. So we conduct data for advocacy workshops in which participants, members of these CVOs, are familiarized with data sources, the government data sources, because we find that that is the most powerful to use in advocacy with the government. And so they understand what each indicator means, how it is calculated. They understand how to use secondary data in conjunction with their own lived realities and micro level, field level, primary data, and how these speak to each other. And then they move into a phase where they understand how to do advocacy based on the combination of secondary and primary data. Currently, the partners in 2 states in the COVID period are doing studies on effect of COVID on maternal health services and adolescent health and their other needs, and what these mean for the adolescent reproductive and sexual health programs. The whole idea is leave no one behind, and so we feel that the representation of the groups who are left behind are most important, and the power equations have to shift. So let me stop here. I think I've done my 2 minutes, and I'll be happy to answer any questions if there's an opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Renu. On to John.
So I just wanted to spend 2 minutes talking about digital government and digital government procurement reform, particularly procurement reform. I work with the Global Digital Marketplace Programme, and it's a prosperity-funded programme that it focuses on digital public procurement reform through open digital government. By using the experiences and learnings from the UK's government digital service, the Global Digital Marketplace Programme looks to support international governments, typically mid-tier economy emerging governments, to look to support international and rather national and subnational activities. Now, from a procurement reform point of view, the data aspect of things is key. And we also work with subnational as well as national. It very much focuses on open data to ensure transparency, to ensure resilience and sustainability, in particular, as it relates to public procurement. As I mentioned, we are focusing on our subnational with our program. Currently, we focus on 5 countries and at the subnational level in those countries. That's Mexico, Colombia, South Africa, Malaysia, and Indonesia. And we work in the states and in the cities. And in that focus, it's very important because we're able to access applications and projects that really do affect the citizen. The nature of subnationals often mean that we see greater agility and ability to provide impact nearer to the citizen. The downside can also be limited awareness and capture of data in a robust and resilient way. So there's pros and cons in both. We undertake projects that look to use standards such as open contracting data standards and beneficial ownership data standards. We find by using these open standards in use with the projects and the contracts and the applications we have, it's easier for local SMEs to access. We get greater trust and more competition when there's transparency and open data, and greater innovation and lower costs, and obviously simpler contracts as well. So to complement the program and support our project delivery, we've developed a digital buying guide. The digital buying guide, coincidentally, is going live today, and I'll mention the URL at the end of this 2 minutes, and it provides an online product that guides, in particular, government procurement professionals and buying departments through the good practice associated with public procurement, open data, and so on. Included in the digital buying guide is a section on emergency buying, given the current situation with COVID, where we encourage buying transparently with data, where there is pressure for direct awards and also a speed for purchase. But we shouldn't drop our standards when it comes to those sorts of things, even though obviously there's a requirement when we have direct awards and need for speed. The digital buying guide specifically is at digitalbuyingguide.org as a URL. Please have a look at it. It's gone public beta live today, and all of these activities link to the UN's SDGs with a particular focus on SDG 11. I think that brings me to the end of what I wanted to talk about. So please remember the URL as digitalbuyingguide.org. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John. We'll invite Selena next.
Hi, I'm Selena. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Zindi. Zindi is a data science competition platform focused uniquely on the African market. And we've convened a community of over 20,000 data scientists who are using AI and machine learning to solve some of the world's most pressing problems. I wanted to start with an example of one of our data scientists that make up the 20,000 data scientists. This is Lawrence. He's in Kenya. He's a 4th-year student in Nairobi, and he started his journey on data science 2 years ago. He's self-taught, and mostly by joining Zindi. In the last 2 years, he's solved problems like building an AI chatbot for mental health in Kenya, using deep learning to identify crop types using satellite imagery. But since COVID, he's been profoundly impacted. His university has shut down, he was sent home, and he's had to delay his graduation by a year. But he's continued his journey by continuing to join competitions on Zindi. He's even become a mentor on the Zindi platform and has mentored younger data scientists. And he even recently started an internship that he found through the Zindi platform. So Zindi supports our community of 20,000 data scientists in 3 key ways. We host data science challenges that are built around real-world problems from the industry. We connect our data scientists to job opportunities, and we also provide real-world tutorials and mentorship opportunities to our data scientists. We found that our community has been profoundly impacted by COVID. They've been cut off by education and employment opportunities. But we found that by doing the same thing that we've already been doing, which through Zindi, we've been able to help our community continue to build on their opportunities and build on their skills through exposure to real world upskilling opportunities and employment opportunities through Zindi. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Selena. Next up, we'll invite Mike. Over to you.
Hi, thanks, Paige. My name is Mike Klein. I run a program with FCDO, which used to be named DFID, called COVID Action. And it's the COVID Action Data Challenge that I lead in particular, which is looking to source digital tools to inform response to COVID-19. In the subnational data use principles really came clear to me would be, from running this process, would be Principle 2 and Principle 4. Principle 2 being measure at community scale and 4 bridging levels. I think the kind of clearest articulation from running this process is Metcalfe's law has become kind of really clear and central to kind of us thinking through our approach, which basically says the size of the network increases as the value of the network increases. And so you see this in everything from transportation networks to digital tools. So digital companies typically account for about 70 or 80% of the value of these companies, so that network effect. And so when we get down into promoting tools, we've sourced, I think, 339 tools at the global level. And then in promoting those tools, it's really crucial to be able to bridge those connections down to the level of people having conversations around what needs we're addressing for them, end users. So we have set up a collaboration with GPSED, which is a global partnership for sustainable development data, who is then bridging that network onto NSOs. And in both of those cases, what we're seeing is the value of that network that GPSED brings and those relationships with national statistics offices really can't be replicated. It's been integral to us being able to action this, our work, move it forward, and put the digital tools that we've identified in the hands of people that can use them really, today in terms of how we're working it. And so in going forward, we're going to continue to invest in these networks. We see real value in GPSED and the Digital Impact Alliance and others, and look forward to kind of bringing this network to scale as well with the principles of subnational data use. Thanks so much.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Mike. And over to you, Omar.
Thank you very much, the organizer for this. My name is Omar from Tanzania Data Lab. We have really spent some time at the subnational levels, and actually based on the principles on our learning from the previous data Zeto to the DLAB, which is an outcome of the MCC funded projects. Actually, what we have learned so far is these principles actually sometimes are interdependent. For example, if you're talking about inclusivities, you have really to make sure there is a capabilities in order to be able to attain that. At the same time, there is a financial capability that is needed to the local organizations and the community themselves. So during the COVID-19, what we have really learned, to be honest, is, as you know, from the Tanzania path we have taken is slightly different. But still, what I can say is we have seen the role of the technology has enabled us at least to facilitate continue of engagement to the citizen levels. And through that situations, we didn't manage well to include everyone because there is a diverse of capabilities at that particular time, but also in terms of the access to technologies. Talking about in a situation where some are extremely in the rural community, where even in the infrastructure that we are talking about is not yet in place. But in reality, it's based on the champions that we identified and the capabilities and the role of the media. Just to give you an example, when we're engaging the citizens before the COVID on community mapping, and when we generate thousands of data that they can be used to address the community problems, when we want to share back these data to them, with the visualization that we developed with some of their representatives. That's where the COVID-19 came up in place. And how do we share this back? For example, there was issues related to awareness of the hepatitis B, which the campaign is to start very soon. So what we really did was smartly to engage the few champions who were managed to make sure that they can adopt these technologies that specifically were Zoom and WhatsApp. And through that, we engaged the media, which they were running it through that process of sharing with the SMS network. The advantage with some of the champions, they were already established the community of these data users within the SMS network. So it was easy to do that. But again, at the subnational level with these principles, we really need to make sure these are interconnected principles. You cannot do one and make it most of them. And again, in terms of the tech part, there are some people who benefit through this, but slightly still it takes time to include everyone, especially in that particular situations. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Omar, and thank you so much, Renu, John, Selena, and Mike for those lightning talks. For our final kind of roundtable session for the day, I'd like to introduce Charlene Megwe Kagume, who's a senior consultant at Development Gateway, who will be moderating the final mini roundtable session. I'd also like to invite Mitch Blazer from the U.S. Millennium Challenge Corporation's Data Collaboratives for Local Impact Program, Claudine Lim from the UN Foundation's DIAL, and Al Kaggs from the Open Institute to go ahead and turn on your cameras to join the final panel for today. Welcome all.
Great, thank you, Paige. I have the opportunity and the pleasure to, I think, bring in what we've all discussed today and think about next steps. So looking at the principles moving forward, what do we still need to achieve? What has changed in the crisis that we need to address or be particularly mindful of? With me, we have Claudine Lim from DIAL, Al Kaggs from the Open Institute, and Mitch Blazer from MCC. So I'll start off the discussion with Claudine from DIAL. And the reason I'm starting off with that is because we at DGC, DIAL's principles for digital development as the umbrella under which the subnational principles nest. So from your kind of global perspective, what do you see us as a community within the data and digital for development space as needing to be mindful of moving forward?
Thank you for that question, Charlene, and thank you all for having me today. So the subnational principles have been great in ensuring, local ownership and collaboration with funders and local communities. But I think especially moving forward, given the COVID-19 pandemic, we've really seen the interests of the public and private start to become blurred. And especially in the context of the 2030 agenda, we really want to ensure that we're doing no harm and upholding the pledge of leaving no one behind. So really ensuring that we don't facilitate or exacerbate harm being done by others. So while data is important, we do have to address privacy and security with careful reflection of what data is being collected, how it's acquired, used, stored, and shared. And we see this, as we're trying to address COVID-19 through things like contact tracing. But how do you do no harm with data collection? And there's like a subset of responsible data use that I think that we really need to be mindful of as we move forward. And that means being mindful of power dynamics. Who are the least powerful people in these exchanges? And how powerful are the people making the decisions using the data? Have there been checks and balances built in case something unexpected happens with the data, and really taking precautions? So can you sufficiently evaluate the risks and harms in the data that you're collecting? And if not, to really pause and ask yourself, why can't you not assess these risks? And just to be thoughtful in the innovation process as well. So has the approach to data collection and what you're collecting been considered with care and thought and not just speed. So especially with emergency situations, being mindful of this is important. As well as diversity and bias. So what perspectives are missing from the data sets? Who was and wasn't in the room when the decisions were being made, and what data is not being collected? And that's all just to say that moving forward, it's about building better behaviors with the data that we have. We know that not one size fits all. There's no one existing culture that a data set can inform, and context and behaviors really change the implications of how the data is used. So in short, there are no shortcuts, and responsible data use is a very important aspect of data moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Claudine. Yeah, great points on building better behavior. So I think I'll turn it over to Al. As a co-founder of course, the CEO of Open Institute, and we know it's an organization that's really been walking the talk of subnational principles. So even before they were elaborated, what do you see as the most significant gap or opportunity?
Well, you know, as has been said, the issue of do no harm is a really important one. And I think, you know, during this time of COVID-19, I had intended to tell you a story that I was this week told by a friend of mine in Uganda that someone has been arrested for and charged with tax fraud. And the way that they were found is that their health data, they were found to be, they were found through the COVID tracing aspect, and then their data was passed on to the security agencies, who in turn turned over his data to the tax authorities, who then caught him on tax issues. These are the challenges that are presented by the current situation, and that these principles hopefully can be beefed up to include. But the aspect of how do we ensure that the government restores our rights? It was necessary for government to actually begin to use our data on things like contact tracing. Like in Kenya, I think the government has had to use our data, our GPS data, to sort of find people who had tested positive but who ran away. So they were tracked via the mobile phones and that sort of thing. But how do you ensure that when there is no crisis, this does not still continue? And how do you also ensure that even while governments have the best interests of the country at heart, how do you ensure that fairness and justice are upheld? One of the other issues that I think was that I think is particularly important to mention here is a question of just how privacy is handled where human rights is concerned. We have seen in several countries, especially in Africa, at least in my view, where governments are actually actively hunting down people who are being seen as dissidents based on the data that they currently have, and that is, and it's exacerbating the sort of human rights violations that are happening, especially in the hands of the state. So that's something that probably needs to be looked at. And the final thing is the practicality of the principles in terms of, so how do they then, how are they then brought to life in people's, perception? How do people then become clear on how this involves them? I'm talking here about, for example, a chief in rural Kenya who sees these principles, but who may not necessarily be clear about what that means for the data that he handles in the context of providing services to the public. So the question, the issue of trickling down the information so that it is user-friendly to literally everybody, because sometimes we use words like do no harm, or we use words like subnational data principles, and for ordinary citizens out there, they may not be very clear on what it is that we are talking about.
Okay, great. So I think it's a good point on pushing it further. So we first spoke about thoughtfulness in our approach in our emergency, but Al has taken us further into when there's no crisis, how do we restore the use of data to be more mindful about our human rights? Next, I'll move on to Mitch. And of course, as a representative of DCLI, which has had such a deep connection in Tanzania and CIV in regards to subnational data use, and really the convener around the principles. What are your thoughts on what we still need to achieve? And of course, thinking of it from a funding perspective, what should be our priorities moving forward?
Thanks, Charlene. It's really compelling to hear all the case studies and the lightning talks from everyone today. And it sort of leverages what we heard a year ago at the Data Rev as well. I think from my perspective, I take the longer view. Certainly COVID has changed the conversation here, but I don't think it's changed the principles. Certainly security is something that has come up a few times and is something that we need to address, I think, in the next iteration of the principles. But looking back, this is a longer term conversation. Al and I, for example, have been having this conversation on subnational data use since the African Open Data Conference in 2015. And it continues to grow. And so I think we're just getting started. What we need to do next, I think, is to look more deeply through the principles to see how we can make improvements and innovations in alignment of methods and tools to the development activities that we're all advocating for. Through these principles, we're leveraging the continued shift or movement of data-driven activity to be more targeted and more granular. That means counting everyone, moving beyond national and regional averages. And I think that funders are looking for better ways to reach people across a number of sectors. And subnational reach is something that is advocated through these principles and is interesting to funders because real change then happens at local and personal levels. I think it's important that we improve our methods of listening in communities and that we, at the same time, work to locally build the skills that are needed to use the information that comes out of those listening campaigns. At the same time, we have to be inclusive. So as we listen, as we feed back information, we need to make sure that the voices of women in particular are heard, and that marginalized groups and those who are heard less have the skills to participate and lead in a data-driven dialogue. From my perspective, it's important to have a clear picture of subnational data use and systems. In the countries that we've partnered with, MCC is commissioning data ecosystem assessments. And I think these tie into the principles because we're explicitly requiring a study of subnational data use, and we're studying the barriers to movement of data between national, subnational, and international levels of understanding. I think the last thing I'll say is that we need to innovate how we measure results and how we talk about subnational work. Al always has fantastic stories about the people, and that's one way that we can relate. But I think the other way that we need to do this is to be very data-driven ourselves in how we talk about our subnational activity, how we advocate for additional funding and additional work. We aren't using enough evidence. We need to better define cost-benefit analyses and really use that as a way to anchor our work and our advocacy for additional subnational activity.
Great. Thank you, Mitch. So I think we're at time, but just to summarize what's been discussed today, I think it's more moving forward, think about more privacy and security issues. So build better behavior. Think about practicality of the principles. For example, I'll give us an example of the chief. Will they be able to understand and implement? And then further thinking about improvement in alignment of tools. So being more innovative, and especially being more data-driven ourselves and thinking about better ways to understand the work we do. So I'd like to thank you, Claudine, Al, and Mitch, and I'll hand it over back to Paige.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Charlene, and thank you so much to our panelists from the second mini roundtable, as well as to all of our speakers and presenters today. A virtual round of applause via Zoom, much less satisfying than applause in person, but please know we're very grateful for your participation and support. Thank you as well for everyone who is able to join us today on this virtual webinar, and for those who've been engaging via the Q&A chat, also via social media. This is a very short amount of time to cover a very big topic. So we'll hope you continue to share feedback with us even after this meeting closes. So my kind of overall attempt at summarizing these past 60 minutes would be kind of looking back on the principles in crisis. What really has come through is, as really important, especially during crisis, is kind of continuing that communication across levels and especially within the communities in which we work, the import of kind of strengthening local capacities, and really the value of ongoing innovation and iteration. And also as well, looking forward, the need to be much more intentional about how we achieve the principle of do no harm, the need to really push ourselves to communicate the subnational principles in a way that makes sense, especially for the communities that we're working with, and that we aim to hopefully that these principles capture and to really validate that these principles are meaningful with those communities. And also really as well that this process is one of ongoing conversation and iteration, that we're really just getting started, and these principles should be something that we revisit regularly to make sure we're taking into account kind of emerging findings and good practices. So as event organizers, we commit to following up in the coming weeks with a revised principles document. Emily shared the link in the chat, and we'll also send through a link and a follow-up email after this, inviting folks for further feedback, to provide additional case studies, trying to incorporate in this revised document our discussions from today. And then we'll look forward to kind of continuing this conversation over the coming several months, and especially looking at maybe a next inflection point at the in-person World Data Forum next year. So with that, thank you all so much for joining us, and we wish you health and well-being in the weeks ahead. Thank you all so much.